So in last week's video, we started talking about career conversations as a manager, talking with your team about where they might want to go. So if you haven't watched that, pause, go back and watch it, and then come back. But where we picked off is having conversations with your team members and really talking about maybe the first time you're having that. And as I ended that video, I said, as you have career conversations, it's not just a one and done. And ideally, it's not something you're just having, once a year if you have performance reviews. But it's something that you're having on an ongoing basis. And so the question I get sometimes is, how often should I be having these career conversations? Like, is this something, if I meet with my team member every week, is that something just to add to the agenda? And a lot of times it's thinking about the comfort for you and for that team member. And so objectively, if you think about if every single week your manager is saying, okay, now your career, then it can actually end up kind of falling by the wayside because it's hard every week to think about the future. So what I tend to recommend is, as you think about the career topic, is looking at, especially if you meet a team member weekly, like talking about that maybe on a monthly basis or even quarterly basis more in depth. And so giving it some space that can allow that team member to have some of those experiences and, get more information or give them opportunities. And so it's always something that team members should feel comfortable bringing up to you and adding that to that agenda. But as far as like a regular cadence, and again, that's where as you talk to your team, I mentioned in the last video, talking to your team before you have those conversations, saying, I'd love to add this to our one-on-one agendas. We'll look at whether it's monthly or quarterly to have these, but always feel free if you want to bring this up to have this as a topic on our one-on-ones. But I want to make sure that we're covering this, at least quarterly. And so that's why just logistically it can be helpful to have like, okay, we're going to talk about this the first one-on-one of the month or the first one-on-one of the quarter. So you're not so busy thinking of like, okay, when are we talking about that? But just having that even as a calendar reminder in your calendar. But so having that as an ongoing conversation. But then what do you do if someone's saying, okay, I want your job. What can I do? Like, okay, that's fantastic. Well, that actually might be a little bit easier because when it's your job, you have a sense of maybe information you wish you had before you came into the job, things that if you were stepping into the job, you might do differently. And so in that instance, you might have some ideas on training and development. But a lot of this is thinking about connections that you can make for that individual. So if someone, is curious about another department, thinking about how you can set those up. Now, sometimes you got to be mindful of people's time. And just because you want your team member to talk to somebody on another team about their career doesn't mean that that's the right time for that team member. You don't know what's going on with them, and they may be totally swamped and just can't have, an hour-long or whatever conversation. So being super mindful of that and understanding that you always got to balance people's time. But that is why, in particular, what you can do that can really help your team at scale, and as a manager, you're often trying to do the most you can in the least amount of time, but is for your team to set up meetings with another team. Like if there's teams that your team frequently works with, and they may work with professionally, but don't have that, personal relationships or don't tend to work with them except for like, I need this, I got that, very transactional. It can be helpful to set up a session between your two teams and have a couple people talk about what they do. And that can seem super like, okay, people just talking about their work. Absolutely. What can seem boring and routine to one person can be really interesting and new information to others. So one way as a manager is, especially if people on your team are curious or if they want to move up the organizational ladder, so to speak, and they need to develop some more like cross-functional knowledge, getting a sense of how other departments work, setting up, double team meetings and having your team present and their team present, just a couple people, talking to them, preparing them. But having those sessions can be really powerful and a great way to help from that development perspective and even help those individuals have more questions they can follow up later. But I mentioned that one thing I can do is give you tips on how to use ChatGPT. Now, I'm giving these in part because this Friday comes out my new LinkedIn Learning course on how managers can leverage ChatGPT AI for their team's development and then their own career development. So that's a sneak peek. So I'll be talking more about that. But I talk about ChatGPT, and you can see in the course, and I've talked about this in some videos on ChatGPT, is to be super mindful that things like ChatGPT and other AI tools, it's not your diary and it's not an encyclopedia. So you don't want to ever put confidential information in there. You always want to make sure that you're abiding by your organization's policies and following, within those. And it's not an encyclopedia, meaning that it doesn't always have all the information. And so you don't want to rely on it for facts. But some ways it can be helpful are to think, okay, if you have, let's say you have 6 direct reports, and they want like 6 very different things. Like let's say they run the spectrum of a team member who's been in role for a while, who's like, I just want to do this job right now. And I'm really good. And I don't have an interest at this point in moving up. And if I were pushed to do that, I'd probably leave. Because you might hear that from team members. And if they're telling you that, that's fantastic. Because in my mind, it's better for them to tell you that, like I'm good in my job, rather than them feel like they need to tell you that they want to move into another role and it doesn't end up doing well for anybody. Okay, let's say you have that person who's like, I'm good, I want to do this job. Now, you might run the gamut and have someone that's like, I want to be CEO one day of this organization. And you might have that. And you may think to yourself, okay, how do I balance these? Well, one thing you can do is use a tool like a ChatGPT. So I'll show you here on the prompt. So you can type in a prompt of, I have a team member who's really satisfied in their role and they're content. What are things I can do for learning and development to keep that team member engaged? So you're going to see it. So here are some of these ideas that ChatGPT generates. And you can see some of this is around helping other team members train or having them develop an expertise. But so some of these things, you can get these ideas and you can build on them. Okay, all right, so, but this employee is more in this kind of role. And you can do that, and ChatGPT will generate different ideas. And so you can tweak those to make it applicable. All the way up to your team member that says they want to be CEO, and you're thinking, okay, this is my general role. My team member who has this wants to become a CEO. How do I prepare them for the role? On screen. So here's another example. So this is some ways to help your team member with cross-functional development. In like anything that a ChatGPT generates, you may look at some and think, okay, that's not going to work. That might work. But what I tend to see with any type of prompt like this from a learning and development is giving it some of that tailored information can help in actually 100% of the time. When I've entered prompts, I've gotten some piece of information that I'm like, okay, that's good. I can work with that. Even if there's other things, I'm like, okay, I wouldn't. But so it can be really helpful and be like a secondary coach that's sitting here to give you those ideas and can put them in a format that's more helpful than if you just do an internet search. And so this is why, in your organization, you may have a completely robust training and development program. But if you watch the first video and you're watching this video, then my guess is that you're looking for some additional ideas and resources. And so what I'm trying to do in these two with career conversations is give you ideas as a manager on the things that you can do to help those team members. And sometimes it's leveraging, again, those free resources, because you can have a completely free account on ChatGPT. But to have those and use those to tailor those. So getting some of the ideas, okay, having your one-on-one document for your team members. Okay, here are some of these ideas I saw. And then going back to the team member. Okay, let's try out some of these. So these are ways that as you have these career conversations, you can have these be ongoing. And for my final tip, again, going back to ChatGPT and asking, how can I keep up career conversations with my team members? They can give you ideas in seconds. Okay, we'll have them generate here. But some of these are just these ideas that can help you as a manager, because you'll see the common thread is to build trust with your team and have open communication with your team on both sides. So they feel comfortable telling you how they really feel and what they're really interested in. And you don't have to have all the answers. You don't. Often having questions can be more valuable than having all the answers, because you can figure those out down the line. But just having that, the most common thread I see of managers, bosses that support team members in their careers is trying to figure out how to help them go where they want to go. In putting your own self-consciousness or ego or any of those things to the side, and knowing that as you help your team develop, that is what true leadership is. And so this is the 2-part series on career conversations. And I hope it's helpful, and please feel free to share this, if it has been helpful, with any other managers who might like to see this. And if this is helpful, I have a Manager 101 course that gives you tools to help to become the manager that you want to be and that your teams deserve. And so I'll include that in the description so you can see if you want more information, and it includes a resource guide to have things to put that leadership tips